Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Imagine yourself on a sailboat, discovering uninhabited islands, exploring new ports, and disconnecting from the wider world. That's just the life we're going to explore today, talking to the extraordinary Rob Hamill about how he and his family ended up living on a sailboat. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the podcast.
Howdy, Richard. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be chatting with you.
I'm excited to chat. You have this incredible YouTube channel, the Cruising Kiwis. I showed it to my wife, and it gave both of us some serious wanderlust. Can you maybe start with just talking, how did you become, a YouTuber?
It's sort of like many things in life. It's a morph. It's a process of, slow progression from one thing to another. And we set off sailing with our children back in 2015 after we bought our yacht, and we were sort of learning to sail and having massive learning curves at that time. We set off up into Tonga, Fiji, Vanuatu and New Caledonia and back to New Zealand. And Rachel documented our journey via a blog, which is a lot of time, but it was very rewarding. And then we sort of mucked around in New Zealand a little bit for a few years, and then we set off again full-time this time with an intention to sort of circumnavigate the world in 2018. And she decided rather than write a blog, she felt, the video thing was way more accessible, and she self-taught to have a go with the YouTube channel. And, that first episode 1, I tell you, she must have spent, and I think I'm under cooking this, I reckon at least 250 hours on that very first episode. I cannot tell you how much time she spent on that. She was just so learning. She'd go to YouTube, how do I do this, how do I do it? And then she'd lose things. Anyway, and learning how to use the program. And long story, long answer, short question, but that's how it began. It was really for friends and family, like the written blog had been in 2015. This was going to be for friends and family. As things progressed after COVID, or during COVID, our process was I was traveling back and forth from the boat to New Zealand, and I'd be doing speaking engagements, or I was an event director doing a couple of sporting events. And when COVID hit, we were in Australia, and I was about to fly back to New Zealand, and then of course New Zealand shut down and Australia shut down, and I couldn't move. So I pretty much lost everything. So suddenly I lost, well, not everything, we lost about 80% of our income. So then the channel took on a new slant, because it was going to have to try to sustain us, and it became a bit more of a profession, I suppose, from a hobby.
Well, and it is, it's super professionally done, and it's hard to believe it's, self-taught. I really love the music choices. I don't know, a lot of times, I notice the music, and so we must have a similar taste in music, because I'm like, oh, this is great music again and again.
It's really cool you've noticed that, actually, because Rachel, she puts a lot of time into, and she'll often, not always, you just can't always, but the number of times she'll match the lyrics with the moment. You'd be surprised. If I don't listen to lyrics, so I never hear it.
I don't either. I don't listen to lyrics, so I don't know. So I'm just like, oh, this is like this is a good tune for what's going on.
I agree, but she has another dimension to that. Honestly, she loves all that stuff. Anyway, she's very good at it.
So you live on a sailboat now. How did you fall in love with the water?
Well, I grew up in a place called Whakatane. It's on the east. It's not a rude word, by the way. It's a Māori name, New Zealand Māori tradition, indigenous people of New Zealand language. Whakatane, spelt WH Akatane, and right on the river mouth. My parents built a house there, and so we grew up right in this area of incredible bounty of adventure from the water. There's a sort of a massive hill behind us in the bush, and we were, as kids, playing in the river and then in the ocean, the beautiful beaches, surf and everything at our doorstep. So I grew up with that. My dad took us fishing every other weekend out to sea, and my dad loved sailing, so we ended up going and doing small boat sailing, centerboard sailing. Back then it was P class, which is sort of like an optimist. I gave up that after about 13, 14 years of age, never went back to it again until we started this adventure. But I think there's always been a very strong connection for our family with the water.
You were a professional or an amateur. You went to world championships for rowing, so it wasn't just sailing. It was being on the water, in an athletic format. And you were quite accomplished. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there was a local rowing club up the river further from our home. I kind of fell into it after I'd left school. I started playing rugby, which every decent red-blooded Kiwi should do at some point in their young lives. Play rugby. It's a hardcore sport, and but I was actually quite miserable, Richard. I was very unhappy for a variety of reasons, and sport was kind of my saviour. Rugby, I tried rugby. When I was at school, I played volleyball, and I played to the highest level, national level, played for my country. But after school, there was no volleyball. So as I say, took up rugby. But I was very unhappy. I was drinking a lot. I was getting inebriated every weekend. In fact, during the week as well, many times with my friends. And we can go into that a bit later on, but why that was. But I ended up, a friend of mine said, I'm going to go for a row tomorrow. And I said, oh yeah, well, what time? 8 o'clock. They thought, oh man, that's too early for me. I won't make that. But I did, and I loved it immediately. And it kind of changed my life, actually. Became very committed very quickly to having a crack at, going to the highest level. And I was 19, 20 at the time. I was 20 actually when I took up the sport seriously, and had some success. And yeah.
A lot of people find solace in the outdoors, this time away from kind of the pressures of everyday life. In your case, you were really unhappy. Do you want to maybe share a little bit about, what was causing this, this challenge in your life?
Yeah, well, my eldest brother, there's a connection with the sea, I guess, again, in the water. And my eldest brother loved sailing, and he ended up, there's a thing called the OE in New Zealand called the Overseas Experience, where most young Kiwis, teenagers, early 20s perhaps, take off and have their OE by travelling around somewhere around the world. A large proportion of Kiwis go to England and then they branch out, will get a job at a pub or something, and then have big adventures travelling to Europe or to Africa, and then maintaining a bit of income while in London or England somewhere, and using that as a base. But a lot don't. A lot will go to Canada, will go to America or Australia. And in my brother's case, he went to Australia and ended up doing a lot of sailing, cruising, on getting jobs or just having hobby work there, and ended up buying a yacht up in Darwin, at the very north extreme of Australia. And he sailed off with a friend and his girlfriend up to Southeast Asia. And this was going to be the start of what was going to be a big sailing worldwide circumnavigation, I think. And unfortunately, after about 18 months, he on a particularly fateful voyage, he and his friend Stuart Glass, a Canadian, and a paying passenger charter, an Englishman, John Dewhurst, were sailing up to Thailand. This was in 1978. They got blown off course into Cambodian waters, and they took shelter behind an island called Koh Tang Island, about 50 kilometres or about 30, 40 miles off the coast. Little did they know, it was a very small island. On the other side of that island was a Khmer Rouge naval gun base. And that night they were attacked by a gunboat. Stuart, the Canadian, was shot and killed at that time. And my brother was in the water with him, and he died in his arms, and he buried him at sea. And the charter Englishman, John Dewhurst, and my brother Kerry were taken prisoner back to Tuol Sleng prison in Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia, where they were tortured for a couple of months, and they were forced to sign confessions to being CIA, and then were executed by the regime. Now, at this time, this is 1978. I was 14 at the time, and my parents didn't know what happened. He just disappeared off the planet, as far as we knew. He used to write amazing letters that were beautiful and vivid, and we used to live vicariously through the experiences that he described to us. They stopped. We had no idea what had happened, and it took, in fact, it was 16 months before we heard any news about what was going on. And then we actually heard the fateful news through the media. And then, so that was pretty tough for my parents in particular. And it was a big blow. After the hope, there's a lot of hope. You can imagine you're hoping for the best. It comes. My mother used to, at Christmas time that year, she said, "Oh, he's going to sail over the horizon, and come and share adventures of massive, incredible adventures that never were to be told." So that was kind of a bad time, and then even worse, about 8 months after we heard the news about Kerry's death, my second eldest brother John, who was very close to Kerry, they're only about 12 months apart, and they grew up in this idyllic location having adventures together. He took his life and threw himself off a nearby cliff from our family home. And so that it was tough. I don't know, it was a really bad time. My parents, I don't know how they got through it actually, and we sort of I don't know. That's kind of what happened, really.
Yes. It just sounds like such a tragedy. And, as a parent myself and having siblings, I can't imagine how challenging it must have been. And then thinking back, 45 years ago, there probably weren't the supports to deal with trauma the way there are now, where you were probably just trying to help your parents out and figure a way through, which put a lot of pressure on you. And, how did you process this? Is that what you felt led to this, drinking a lot and kind of trying to escape the pain of these two terrible events?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all I did was I was just sort of getting on with day-to-day stuff, and it was one day at a time. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult for me to analyze even now. It's just that how people react in different ways, and some people. For me, it was just to get on and have fun with my mates as much as I could, and play as much sport as I could, and don't give too much concern about academic stuff. And I mean, just as a young fella, it's hard to process all that stuff, really, and a lot of grief there. And
And so you threw yourself into rowing. You went to the Olympics, I think, and then you decided to row across the Atlantic in a 22-foot plywood boat, which seems incredible to me. How did the decision to row across the Atlantic come about?
Well, I was part of the New Zealand rowing team that went to the Olympic Games, which were in Atlanta in 1996, and it was just prior. We were training in Charlottesville, actually, and while I was there, I saw a flyer that was on a notice board, and it said Atlantic Rowing Race, and someone in America was looking for a teammate to join them. But as an aside note, no American team actually entered that race, but there was certainly someone was quite keen to do so. And I thought, wow, what an amazing concept, this first ever rowing race across an ocean. And it was from, the start was to be Tenerife in the Canary Islands across to Barbados in the West Indies, about 2,500 miles of open ocean. And it just captivated me, I thought, wow, got to have a crack at this. And so after the Olympic Games, came home, started looking how I could do it, what was involved to do it, and I very quickly learnt that it was a very expensive exercise. The entry fee alone was something like 15,000 British pounds. I had no money, and then you had to build this kit set boat. So the organisers, it was 23 sheets of plywood that the organisers would send to you, and then you pull this thing apart and assemble it. So it was a standard kit that everyone got. And I had to buy this as well on top of the entry fee, get it sent out, and then somehow build this thing and then get it back to the start line in Tenerife up in the north. On the other, like if we're where we are in New Zealand, Canary Islands is almost exactly the opposite point if you put it on the globe. And then to get this thing on the other side of the start line, and it was such an amazing challenge. Getting to the start was as big a challenge as the race. And about 18 months later, we ended up at the start line. I had to look for a teammate. None of my Olympic teammates were the slightest bit interested to join me. They thought I was nuts, and they were half right. But there was an element of intrigue and challenge and adventure and competition that just it was unmissable. And I found a teammate, actually, a guy called Phil Stubbs, perfect teammate, coast to coast athlete, an Ironman triathlete, and he had surfboat rowing background as well. So we turned up 18 months later on the start line.
And you set a world record in doing that of just over 41 days.
Yeah, it wasn't really a comparable world record. There had been attempts to row oceans prior to that in the last sort of century, but those people were carrying their own water, individuals, couple blokes here and there. I think there were about 20 people that attempted to row oceans in this last century, and of those, actually about I think 8 had perished at sea. But they weren't racing each other. They were doing it as individuals, and they were loading the boat down with heavy equipment and as I say, carrying their own water, which was incredibly heavy. But these boats, you took water makers, so you were making water as you progressed through the race. So not a really comparable world record, but we did win the race, yes, and that was pretty cool.
So there's a really interesting quote from you in an article I was reading. It says, "When I started my own family, I decided to prioritize experiences together."
Here.
And, a lot of people realize that when their kids are old, when they leave home and they realize, oh, I kind of missed out all this time with my kids. You realize that really early on. And I'm just, why was that so important to you?
I can answer that now because I think this is the reason why. Not that it was a conscious thing at the time, but just seemed right. But we homeschooled the kids, we didn't. I'll take it back a step. So I'll go back a step. I've got this kind of basic philosophy in life that if you have any hard questions about philosophical things you want to do, I ask myself, well, what would I do if I lived in a cave? Because we've got these modern caves we've built over our heads, but basically we're still the same creature that lived, thousands of years ago. We haven't changed much in that time. So I asked myself, well, what would I do if we're in that situation? And an example, when we had our first child, Finn, we brought our son home and we brought him in, and we had him in the room with us and even had him in bed with us for a long time. We didn't put him into the next bedroom, which would be like the next cave, the cave next door, for the saber-tooth to eat him, So I'd relate these things back to being a cave dweller, and you get a lot of answers that make sense when you ask yourself the question in different situations. And so to take that a bit further, we didn't want to kick our sons out to go and learn life. Why can't we teach our kids how to learn, along the way as well? So I'm not going to send them out for 8 hours a day, for 5 days a week, for somebody else to tell them what's right and wrong and what's this and that and up and down. And so Rachel was amazing at this point. She had no teaching experience, and it was a big call. She took on the challenge, and then we sort of progressed from there. And of course, then we decided to have these adventures. And if we're going to do these adventures, we can't wait for too long, because pretty soon they're going to want to have their own life. And when Finn was 12, we set off on buying this boat, and we talked about a boat or a bus. Do we travel by land and see or do we do it by boat? And we chose the expensive option, but it was a very good option. And our youngest at that point was 7, and off we went. I wish we'd done it a couple, 3 years earlier, actually. And I'd recommend anyone seriously thinking about doing anything, and I mean anything, in terms of adventure or discovery or challenge. It doesn't have to be outside your county even. It could be local, very local, depending how you're going to do it. But get on with it. Seriously, get on with it. There's no time like now. And because you just don't know what's around the corner. And that was our driving thing. There's another element to that though, Richard, and it's the that historical thing with my family. When I reflect on it now, I do think losing my brothers and that separation, and my parents put my two eldest brothers into boarding school in Auckland, which is like 200 miles away from our hometown. And so when I was a young fella, they were gone most of the time. They weren't in my life. I idolized these two young men, as a young fella watching them. And they were off to school in this other town that I never saw much of them. I mean, that to me was really, I think that was really sad when I look back on it. So I've done the opposite, I think, subconsciously. I didn't really consciously think about that at the time. But I think that probably has affected my decision-making process somewhat.
Yeah, I've always wondered, people who have dealt with trauma, if they live their lives more. And what I'm hearing from you is, having seen all these things, you realize, make every moment count. Live a life that's really important to you, and have these moments with your kids. It actually is, it's important. And it's something that, as I said at the start, a lot of people realize this when they retire and they have all this time and their kids have their own lives. And you're like, oh, you can never make those memories. Exactly. When you're retired, your kids have their own, they have a job full time. They can't kind of go in a sailboat with you for several years, even though they might want to, because they have their own commitments. And you figured that out way earlier than most people.
Well, I love, someone who I have a lot of time for. He's a very controversial character in a lot of ways. Jordan Peterson. I listened to a lot of what his stuff. I wish I'd heard him 20 years ago, because that would inform a lot of my decisions now as well. But he did say one of the things that, when you look back on, I think the question was, what is the measure, the ultimate measure of success? I think that was the question, along those lines. And he said that your children want to come home and hang out with you. He said that is the ultimate kind of thing. That you've grown these young people and you've sent them off to learn and discover the world, but then they want to come back and hang out with mum and dad. And, I hope our kids want to do that with us in our latter years, because I think that is a really good measure of, what you've done, if it's successful or not.
To have a relationship of trust and love and that's my goal with my kids, is that, we have this relationship where I teach them, and, they also, we enjoy spending time together. But it's not just, for us, it's not just friends. It's also, like you said, I have a lot I want my kids to learn that I know, and I want to share that with them. So it's, if I do it right, then in 15 years, we'll be adventuring together still, even though they'll be adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they'll reflect on probably when you're a Mr. Bad Guy or Mrs. Bad Guy Mum. They'll respect that later on, hopefully, and understand where you're coming from when you're trying to discipline and show them, look, this is tough, man. You're going to have to do this stuff. I know you don't want to do it, but you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to get in the engine bay and change that oil now.
Exactly. I want to go back to, starting to live on the boat. So when you bought the boat, were you and Rachel really clear, we're going to go live on this and this is going to be our life? Or was it kind of, we're going to try this out and we'll wait and see, and, we're only going to commit for a couple of months or a few trips to start?
Yeah, we made a pretty big financial commitment to it. So it was always going to be a reasonable long-term proposition, unless it just went completely bad for us, and then we'd sell. But no, we didn't intend initially to go say, let's go sail around the world. No, it was really about getting up into the South Pacific, to the Tonga, Fiji sort of areas, and let's see how that goes. And let's just have fun, and let's just discover this world that's just off our doorstep, not far away from our home country. And that was, I know the boys still reflect on that first journey. We were sort of 8 months, I think it was, and such fond memories, when they were still young and green around the ears, and these going out to these big seas. And our first passage leaving, sailing out of Auckland for Tonga, man, that was just still one of the worst passages we've ever done. Actually, it was about 8 days of hell, and we got caught in what's called a squeeze, where two weather systems. Sometimes there's a high here, beautiful big high, and a nasty low there, and they can come together, and where the isobars meet, they become intensified, and so the wind in that area can just really blast through. And we got stuck in one of these squeezes for 4 or 5 days, and it was very uncomfortable. And you look back on it with real kind of cool. That was amazing. Yeah, we got through that.
And so when you started, living aboard the sailboat, how old were your kids?
Ivan, our youngest, was 7 or 8. Yeah, I think it was 7. And Declan was, no, he must have been 8. And Declan was 11. And Finn was 12, 13, going 13.
Okay, so still in the time, they're young, they, love being with their parents, it's a super fun time. How did they react? When you said, hey guys, we're going to go and live on a boat, were they, were they worried, or were they all in right from the start?
They were all in. I mean, they were not fussed at all. It was just like, yep, these guys, we'd already had quite a few adventures taking around New Zealand and doing stuff. And so they were fairly well tuned to, we like to keep active and moving, and this is just another form of moving for them. Yeah.
And what are the dynamics of the whole family on the boat? I know, my wife and I were watching your videos, and she's just like, how do they make it work? Like, it's a small place, and, kids we have 3 boys as well. They're super rambunctious, and, quite often one of them has to go to their room because they're, they're trying to annoy the other ones. How do you manage 3 rambunctious kids on a boat?
I know, we just played a lot of games, played a lot of cards, just kept them busy. There's always stuff going on. Yeah, I'm sure there were. Yeah, of course they had arguments. I remember one time Declan took himself off into the room and screaming and crying, and he put a sign on his door. I hate you. I hate you, Mum. I think it was the perpetrator of all bad things in his life at that moment in time. I think he put this and outside his door, yeah, but I mean, it just passes, you get over it. I will say that when they do have little kind of hissy fits, they're just hissy fits. They've always got over themselves very quickly, and within, literally minutes. No bloomin' sulking. And I tell you, if there's any sulking, I'd stamp that out real quick. Anyway, but they've always, when there's been a little hissy fit, an argument, they've got on with it and got back to normal within, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, sometimes 3. And it's just okay. Unless it's something like Declan going into his bedroom, and then he came out 20 minutes later, no problem.
You mentioned you were homeschooling, the kids. Homeschooling kids in a house, you have all the supplies. It seems to me a little bit easier than doing it on a boat. But can you maybe describe, a lot of people don't know anyone who's actually done homeschooling, let alone done it on a boat, traveling around. Can you describe, what's a schedule like for homeschooling, while you're traveling around the world?
Sure. I will say the normal schedule is that most families do sort of from 9 till 11, maybe 12 o'clock, 2, maybe 3 hours, scheduled academia stuff. Not most days, probably 3 or 4 days a week. Some will do it when they're on passage or moving. That becomes a thing. But then when they're in the anchorages, there's no schooling. They can go off and have adventures on land or meet other kids or whatever's going on in that locality. That's normal sailing families. We're perhaps a little less normal because we've never really done any formal academia with the kids while we've been sailing. Yes, we have done some, a bit of maths, a bit of English, a bit of science, very ad hoc, very random. When we feel the urge, we'll sit down and get out the books and but it's over the years it's become less and less and less. And our learning has been just learning by adventure, learning by experience. And so, you could say we're unschooling them. I think that's the term we would probably fit into rather than homeschooling as such. Unschooling is probably more accurate.
I heard a term recently called world schooling, which is right. Kind of, and actually one thing I noticed, we were just in the United States with my kids in South Dakota, and we went to all these museums. And they came back and we listened to a podcast about the history of the indigenous tribes in that part of South Dakota and the history of the U.S. approach to the Native people. And like, we listened to 8 hours of a podcast, saw all these, went to actual museums, and it's like incredible. The kids are just spouting off facts and they've retained so much. I'm just like, this was a great, we went there as a family trip, but actually they learned so much about,
Really?
the history of the U.S. and the indigenous people that it was really impressive. Just, they love, if you take them to a good museum, kids love it. They love learning and to learn about all these different peoples. I saw when I started reading about this world school, I kind of saw, if you engage with local cultures, you learn a lot. If you, learn a little bit of the language and explore, museums or other things, it's different learning, but like it still is, learning and, understanding, learning about how different people do things. So I thought that was a really interesting concept, which it sounds, that might be a little bit what you're doing as well. You're traveling around, they're seeing all these different places, meeting all these different people and cultures, that there's some aspect of that, of just, learning how the world works.
I think the term I've heard before used, children can learn via osmosis. We underestimate the capacity for children to learn without having to sit down at a desk with a pen and paper and a book in a four walls of a classroom. And I think that is very true. I think you'd be, as you say, you're surprised about how much they pick up along the way. Man, they are sponges. They take up everything. And I love this whole creativity thing too, that can be stunted perhaps through opening up the lid early and pouring in all this, learning to read, write, and do maths and sums and whatever. The Steiner philosophy is very interesting. Rudolf Steiner, if you've seen Waldorf schools, he had a philosophy of not doing any academia. Do not teach a kid to read or write before the age of about 8 or 9, 8 at the earliest. And even then, you can always let them do it by osmosis. Just seeing people doing it themselves, whatever, read it, pick up a book and trying to even teach yourself to read and write. Because in fact, there's a very interesting experiment a university guy did in New Zealand, where he compared these Steiner kids from the age of 5 and the outcomes at the age of 11 versus, state schooled kids at 5 and 11. State school kids at 4 or 5, 6 start learning to read and write, and he compared them at 11. And at 11, there was zero difference in the capacity, the ability to read and write. And he then asked the question, well, if there's no difference at that age, what is potentially being compromised by starting to learn too soon? Is that and I think that's a valid question to ask. I don't know the answer to that, but it's sort of, for me, instinctively, that feels right. It feels like a better way to educate a kid, certainly a young child.
Yeah, definitely. Really interesting. I know parts of Scandinavia, they really prioritize play early on as part of the education. It's like learn to play and get along with people. And there's so much knowledge and thought on this.
Do some gardening. Get it out in the soil. Go plant a blimmin' broccoli. Get and make the soil fertile. How do you make the soil fertile? That's life. That's living. That's surviving. That's the first thing I should learn, not to read and write.
Can you talk a little bit about how sailing as a family has, maybe changed the relationship as a family you've had, or also how do you think it's changed your kids?
Look, how it's changed them, I'm not sure, because the boys were really close when we were home. When we were back home, they always got on really well. They're good mates, got on really well with all their friends, and we'd have lots of social stuff with the community we lived in. Te Pahu was a wonderful place to grow kids in the central Waikato. I don't know. I mean, I think I guess they just have a more worldly view of life. I think they are not scared to ask questions, and they don't take what they're told as, they don't take it as truth. They'll ask questions if they see things that don't kind of make sense. They're not scared to ask, well, why are we doing this, and why are they doing that, and why is the government wanting us to do, whatever. They will ask questions, and I think you should question stuff. If there's something that makes you feel, that doesn't seem right, then question everything. It's and I think I hope that's how we have raised them to be inquisitive and to be curious, but also to question where things happening don't seem right.
So my wife, again, we're watching your videos. She's like, how do we do this? And so I have some very pragmatic questions. I bet you a lot of people are listening saying, this sounds incredible. How do we do it? So let's talk first about, in terms of a budget to go and do this lifestyle, in terms of an outlay for a boat, and then kind of like yearly operating costs. Is this something that is economical, or is this something that's going to, need a fair amount of capital to be successful?
Yeah. We were fortunate to have enough money to buy a catamaran. It's not a cheap proposition. I mean, I was, after rowing the Atlantic, I had a good income from speaking. I did a lot of speaking, corporates, after dinner, opening, closing conferences, and COVID shut that down quite well. But that gave us the opportunity to buy a catamaran. But there are cheaper options available. Monohulls now, you can get a second-hand monohull that's in good condition for $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, and some of them, if you make a commitment to buying a boat, and if you give away everything that else is distracting you in life, and you become time rich, you can actually spend, you get a very cheap boat and spend your time, refurbishing that if necessary. If that's the way to do it, that's going to make it work for you. So I think there are lots of different ways where you can have this sort of lifestyle, and it may be a bus, not a boat. I'd still love to actually at some point do, travel by a vehicle on land as well. So it's accessible. The first thing I'd recommend if you did want to start sailing, a lot of people don't have any sailing experience. It doesn't mean to say you can't do it. I'd join a local sailing club, a local cruising club, where a marina, maybe nearby or further down the traps a little bit, and try and go out sailing with other owners of yachts. And they love to have crew on board, often teach them how to sail and have little races, regattas and what have you, and maybe get invited to do a passage over to another country sometime and sort of learn the ropes that way. And so there's various ways you can both learn to sail, but also get the finances together depending on how restricted you are.
I remember years ago reading a book of the first man who sailed across the world. I think his name was Slocum was his last name. I can't remember his first.
Joshua Slocum, yeah.
Yeah. And what I remember from that book was he was always doing these stops to have to repair his boat. He'd be in, wherever for 3 months, doing a bunch of maintenance. And so, granted I think it was in the 50s or 60s. Incredible book, by the way. Again, it just kind of captivated. You can't put it down. But is there a lot of maintenance? Like for me, that seems like, you kind of have to be handy and just build in the fact that you're going to have to do some regular maintenance to a boat that maybe with a car, it's an oil change. It seems like there's a lot more with a sailboat. Is that still the case, or are they less needy of the captain's time?
They take a lot of time. And, I am not a handy person. You've talked about you have to be handy. No, I'm the most handy man there is. I don't rate myself at all in that sense. So I've had to overcome that by just getting amongst it and toiling and grafting and making lots of mistakes in the engine room or up on the mast or whatever. Actually, I don't like climbing up the mast too much, but I let the boys do all the high stuff. But there's always something going on. I always have a list of jobs. If you get the list down to 5, that's really good. But things break, things wear out. You see potential problems coming up. Preventative maintenance is really important. Not my forte, I have to say that one, because the thing I used to say, I can put that off for another couple of months, and next thing, bang, it breaks. So trying to learn to preempt that sort of stuff and to be diligent and consistent and just learn on the ropes. I mean, now I've learned a lot of stuff about engine maintenance and sailboat maintenance but it is never ending, and you're always looking out for things like cracks in the boat. Or look, the boat up here, just up from our anchorage here, he sailed from, we're in the Seychelles right at the moment. It was boat sailed from Tanzania, and like catamaran. And if you can imagine these two hulls of a catamaran, am I saying that properly? And they meet underneath. There's a connection, sort of a bridge that connects the boat. So underneath the bridge, there's water will hit up underneath. And this part here, where the hull where the hull rounds up. Oh God, I'm not going. Where the hull rounds up into the bridge, it's split down the side of the underneath of the hull, the length of the boat, just through the shocking bad weather. So that's the sort of thing, what do you do? Well, you hopefully get to the next destination as this guy has, and he's going to get some experts. And my point is, you can't do everything. Sometimes you have to get the experts to fix stuff, and that's going to be a big job. He'll have to pull the boat out of the water, and they'll have to reinforce things, and internally and externally. And some people can do that themselves, but I certainly wouldn't.
Rob, this has been so incredible to hear, firsthand about, this incredible life. From my point of view, it just seems like this wonderful time you've had with your family, to learn together, to explore together, and, just to understand, what's important in your life and then prioritizing that. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing your story on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And I also want to recommend your YouTube channel, because it is just so much fun to watch. And if you've ever dreamed of living this life, it's, super binge worthy. So when a rainy day comes in, it's, you can watch a couple hours of your show without even knowing it. Where can people find you if they want to, read some of your stories or see your videos?
Well, the Cruising Kiwis, Richard, that's where it's at. The Cruising Kiwis is our YouTube channel. We're on Instagram too. We're not so active on Instagram, but and actually our boys have a channel as well. It's just they do some beautiful work, actually. The Kiwi Boys and the Cruising Kiwis. Yeah. Actually, could I just, before I've just had this idea, there's something that I think that people may take something from. Can I tell you a little anecdote?
Yeah, definitely.
Growing up in this environment, you get challenges that happen all the time. And I'll just explain one thing that happened late last year, in September last year. We had one of the closest near-death experiences of our family, where the boys were freediving. And I won't give you the background, but I'll cut to the chase. Our youngest boy broke the in-house record. He had, the previous record was 27 meters with no flippers, no fins, down and back up again on one breath. And the youngest Ivan, broke it, made 31 meters back up to the top. Then the next two boys, Declan and Finn, decide, well, we need to have a crack at that as well. And Declan made it, Finn did not. He did not make it back to the surface. And we discovered he didn't make it back to the surface when I was in the water with them. And I was watching them in the water go down. I went down sort of 3/4 of the way down, watched them hit the bottom. Then I came back up with Declan. He was first up, and then made sure he was okay. And then I looked down, and Finn was starfished. He had blacked out, and he was sinking. He was a dead weight in the water, and I called out, and I then swam down to rescue him. And he was 6 or 7 meters down at that point and plummeting, and he was very, very heavy. And I had to I grabbed him on the armpit, and man, I was then wondering if I was going to be able to drag him up in time before I blacked out. The boys then followed me down, and the three of us got him back to the surface, and Declan gave him mouth to mouth. And it all came good in the end. It was all okay. Everyone was okay. But what made me think of that was, you're talking about the channel because it's in one of the episodes, but the amazing thing that, and I don't know if I'd have reacted the same way if I hadn't had some challenging adventures out on the ocean, Brian, and we'd had lots to that point, as calmly and as professionally as we all did in that moment in time. And we saved Finn's life. I remember feeling extremely calm. And as I was pulling Finn up, I said to myself, it's going to be okay. He's going to be fine. And everything was such a strange, surreal. And Declan and Ivan were as good, if not better, as well. They were amazing. Declan got him to the surface and immediately started breathing into his mouth to bring him round, Ivan dragged him across. It was, and I don't know. I mean, we want to raise kids who are well-rounded, empathetic, understanding, but also strong and solid and to be relied upon in times of difficulty. And taking your children out to have these adventures and taking risks along the way helps create these young people who are our future generations that I think can make a big difference in various different ways.
Yeah, that was so powerful. I wasn't sure if it was, for me, that would still be really raw. So I wasn't sure if I should ask about that, but it is, what a traumatic experience. And as a parent, even like, again, I'm getting chills again. I couldn't even watch all of it because I just thought, what if that was happening to me? It actually, I can't watch anything bad that happens to kids. I don't know what's going on, but it really emotionally connects with me. But yeah, it's even just your approach of looking at that. You look at the positive of what's a really traumatic situation. There's something really powerful about that mindset of finding the good instead of focusing on the negative of that really challenging incident.
Well, you could argue that when we were young kids, and this is for my parents as well, we could have turned fetal. The grief and the trauma could have just made us go completely internalized and just end up doing nothing with our lives. And I think that's important to be able to face stuff and get on with it. But there's something else there that, oh, yes. So our follow-up episode, we interviewed William Trubridge, a world record holder for freediving with no fins, the deepest human ever, and on one breath with no assistance. And we spoke to William at length, and through that episode, the follow-up episode, there's a ton of information about what to do and what not to do. He explained what we did not do well and what we did do well. Well, here's the thing. 4 days ago, this week, we got contacted by friends of ours who also have a sailing channel and told us that their son was with another guy in Tonga, and a young fella, 18 years old, he went free diving alone and died. He was alone, and that's a big no-no. It's so tragic. And we'd love to think that if you watch our video, that may not have happened. Yeah, I don't know, but it's just so tragic, and there's a lot of accidents happen in freediving things. But it happens in every facet of life. You make mistakes, and you try and learn from them, or you can learn anyway. But yeah, it's really, life is a challenge, but you cannot, for a moment. I don't know how JJ Rice was his name, how his parents are feeling right at the moment. My heart bleeds for them, and may God may rest in peace. But they've got some challenges ahead of them now on how to deal with their grief. And from what little I know of them, I think they will be, well, who knows? I don't know.
Rob, you've shared so much so personally about, your story, the challenges and the impact, just such a powerful episode. So thanks again for sharing that and taking time. It's nighttime in the Seychelles. It's morning here in Canada. But I also really appreciate you, sharing it so honestly and authentically.
You're welcome. And apologies for the light. I had this little light here on the GoPro was out light, and it went flat, as you probably noticed early on.
It did great. And I'm going to put links to all of the YouTube channels and your website in the show notes. And again, it's going to rain some weekends this summer. Go and live vicariously on a sailboat exploring the world. It's really, really fun. Check out Rob's channel, the Cruising Kiwis. With that, thanks for everyone to listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. If you like this episode, please give us a like or a comment. And with that, we'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.